So, I Am a Pebble is our graduation movie that we made at ESMA Nantes for 1 year. It is a short and poetic tale taking place near a river, where Bubble, a young otter, lives with 3 mothie stones. She thinks of them as her family and imagines them as real otters, but as she becomes aware of the true nature, she has to face her loneliness and doubts. Everything started in the rivers of my countryside, which I love for those mossy stones, and a little note in my notebooks about an otter living with a pebble. I shared this with Yasmine, and this pebble quickly became a pebble family. It connected to a feeling of mine, confusion from living in 2 different cities and kind of families, and more generally those distant relationships we can have with our entourage. All this gave us the opportunity to explore a problematic, but the title I'm a Pebble is quite significant for it, like how we can live with our contradiction, how our nature is not so evident, and we have to be open-minded to understand ourselves and others.
We decided early on not to make a graphically realistic film. We wanted a visual universe in line with the story, a universe that would translate on screen the intentions and the tone of the story. That's why we moved toward naive and innocent designs, which are more often evocative and expressive. Some of the best examples that inspired us are the short film Weekends from Trevor Jimenez and the animated film The Boy and the World by Ale Abreu. As we were working on the story, we were regularly thinking that it could be a children's book, and so we looked for ideas in this direction and found Gobgap's illustration and Tonko House work on The Dam Keeper that really inspired us. We didn't know if we could get this render in 3D, but we wanted to try. It also allowed us to escape from the issue of heavy FX, so a realistic film would have required very time-consuming water and vegetation simulations, and in the end we only did 2 weeks of FX with Nuke and Krita. As the character of Bubble experiences an identity blur, we wanted it to be at the heart of the graphic style to illustrate quite literally the blur she was coming through. And obviously, this style allowed us to soften the 3D and bring the aspect of pebbles and otter closer one to another, to make them warmer through their design and colorful textures.
For the modeling part, it was very important to keep simple shapes because we knew that the treatment would blur everything. Some of the elements, like trees, were thought more in silhouette than in 3 dimensions to maintain these readable shapes and to structure the image composition. We did some fear tests on the otter, but we quickly gave up that idea, mainly to keep his facial expression as readable and as we drew it.
The texturing and shading steps were very important to build a good base for the painting treatment. We carefully choose the nature of the brushes used, and in painting the texture, we applied a slight cheat in terms of values. For example, the backs of the otters or pebbles are brighter than the bottom, which was a way for us to obtain a 2D occlusion even before the lighting stage. We wanted the viewer to forget the control we have over things in a 3D production. We were also very attached to the imperfections of 2D animation, which in the end make its charms and richness. This is why we painted several variations of the character textures. So, depending on the animation keys, an image sequence was created shot by shot, which allowed to follow the movement of the character as if each poses were painted. The shading was very similar to a classic production, as we used a lot of subsurface for the plants and the tiny animals and insects. On the other hand, very few elements were reflective, in any case much less than in real life, to not fall into a 3D effect in the counterpart of the desired look. The eyes, especially, are completely matte, and the specula is obtained thanks to the rig for a better expressiveness.
Each shot was designed like a painting, so we had to create a set dressing by shot to keep the image composition and to have an insert and a background. We worked with long focal lengths, so the 3D space was very large, as if Bubble was moving in a real forest. So this allowed us to stagger the plans and to lay out the props with precision. Some of the set dressings were reused, like for the time-lapse. Then we declined it each shade of weather by adding some leaves or put some mushrooms on the ground.
Color scripting was important for us to link colors and lighting at the emotions. We use it as a storytelling tool. This allows us to define at an early stage the global colors of the short film and to block it. There were 6 different moods, it's a lot for 6 minutes, and each of them had to smoothly transition to another. The season's choice was for the main story a way to illustrate the time, but also to use the seasons and its colors to match Bebble's feelings.
The big work done by Nico on the color script allowed us to tackle the lighting part very effectively, since all the work of contrast and nuances had already been solved. And despite the particularity of the painting aspect of our film, the lighting was made in a very classic way.
About the rigging, it was really interesting to work on these different animals. It was quite challenging because we wanted realistic work to be able to move them as real otters, but we also wanted cartoon attributes. The secondary characters, we wanted them more cartoon and with big eyes and nice deformations. And for Bubble and the other otters, as they are fluid and smooth animals with always nice shapes, we wanted to be able to move a lot of parts of the body. And the other challenging part was to rig characters that need to evolve on the floor and on the water too, so with different pivots. So that's why I've added a reverse column that we've used during all the parts under the water, and it was really nice to do these different rigs for our different characters.
The animation style was defined by the art direction of the movie, with animation on 2, 3s or 4s. We did a lot of 2D blocking and posing to really keep this 2D aspect in the final animation. And also we did a lot of reshaping to really hit the right shapes with those 2D eyes that needed really good shape in every shot. The challenge in acting was to stay simple and expressive with only 2 eyes and body acting, without falling into something too human, making it feel like an animal is really going through all this emotion and thought.
So the compositing objective at this point is to complete the matching of the color script. Shots from the family sequence and underwater sequence were particularly a lot of work. There's many effects to add in step, for example night paintings or vibrations in the background. The visual effects were nuke particles. We plugged 2D animation loops and painted samples. This allows us to create rain, snowfalling and ripples, for example. We add 2 nuke scripts, one for the brush aspect and another one for the colors. And we need a lot of communications between those two, because some effects from the colors were added before the brush and some after.
For the 2D stylized process, we actually used a piece of code that I wrote that would sample the image and pick predetermined brushes based on the luminance of the scene, essentially. So for instance, when we had bright areas, we'd use bigger brushes that are rougher in general, and in dark areas we'd use smaller brushes in a higher density. So these brushes were hand-drawn by one of us and put in a specific order for the script to pick based on that luminance and on the image. So we'd use the depth path from our 3D render to determine whether or not a brush should be drawn in front of another on the process. to prevent, for instance, brushes that are supposed to be behind on our scene to be drawn on top of brushes that are supposed to be in front, to avoid people from getting confused about what to look at. Then there was the depth of field that was quite a tricky one actually. We tried to use a typical depth of field at first, but it was not working at all with our style, so in the end we actually made it so that the system draw brushes similarly to everything else, but it would use the distance from the camera to determine the size and density and also transparency of a brush, and then mix them together. For the characters specifically, we would use 3 layers. There was one for the borders that was basically just generating brushes on the borders of the characters, and one on the inside, and another layer that was one of the most important ones actually for the eyes and small things like paws, bird feet and stuff like that, which basically allowed us to have full control on the characters and make sure that we are able to direct the viewer's eye where we want them to look at. And the last step after putting all that together was to add the shadows. And so the shadows were actually rendered separately on the scene, and then we put them together with the rest with a brushified effect to work with the scene, because they would otherwise cause issues if we were to put them at the same time as everything else, because they would overwrite other spots on the image, which was undesirable. We wanted to be able to control the shadows separately from the entire thing and then compose them together with the rest of the scene.